Hello and welcome to another inspiring edition of Just Africa, the show that puts the continent in context and conversation. I am Olumide Shukoya. Today we will be diving into the rhythm of language, the fire of verse, and the politics of pen with a powerful episode themed Poetic Expression, African Literature and Cultural Criticism. I am Olumide Shukoya, and I also have the ever-looking, so gentlemanly.
Hello, Olumide.
How are you doing?
I'm okay. It's good to be here again. This is the weekend. Okay, the weekend starts today, actually. So thank God it's Friday.
Yes. So we're looking at African literature and poetry.
Yes.
What's your thought?
Storytelling. It's all about storytelling and the way we've been telling our stories. And the way we've been telling our stories, we've been telling our stories with the pen. And if you see most of Africa, okay, Professor Oleshenka is there, he's known, Ngugi wa Thiong'o is there,
Leopold.
Is there, yes, Signal. Before Ngugi wa Thiong'o, his work that has to do with the mind, decolonizing the mind, as a way it influenced Africa, probably trying to make sure that, look, move away from the colonizers and, be independent to your own specific identity that you have as an African. So there's a way you are supposed to think. There's a way you're not supposed to subjugate yourself to the powers and the way your colonizers have treated you. It's all different, but there's also an economic part to it. And then we can start to talk about the culture, so talk about the festivals. If we have really taken advantage of all the economic and the business aspect of it, we can look at publishing. The publishing when it comes to the global market. And also that in itself will have to be looked at because now we have the digital aspect of it that has come into play.
Definitely.
So the way we tell our stories now, how to align with the different channels that are available for us to tell the story. And given the fact that this current generation is more amenable to the digital platform, how are we going to tell our story differently from the way the Ngugi wa Thiong'os and the Professor Wole Soyinka did theirs, the Chimamanda Adichie did theirs, and tell a specific and fantastic story about the Civil War and how that's the half of a yellow sun or something like that, how she told it, going through the book. So all this has painted a picture of Africa on the global continent.
True.
And we must be seen to not only sell that part of us, but when globalization is redefined in this dispensation, it must not be defined in a way where Africa is subjugated and put at the background, where we're only being influenced by the Western culture. We must also redefine globalization in the sense that through our language, through our literature, through our arts, our culture, and the way our fashion, the way we are attired, we're equally, redefining globalization and influencing the culture that once influenced us and exercised some form of superiority over our own.
Thank you very much. Now, from Chimamanda's essays to Koleka Putuma's poetry, African writers are wielding art, not just beauty, but as power. But what exactly is literature doing in the fight for identity, memory, and justice? And how are digital platforms reshaping the African voice in this new age? We'll find out shortly after this break. Don't go nowhere. Welcome back to Just Africa. Don't forget you can also stream on YouTube, so please like, comment, and share on YouTube. Follow all our social media platforms at SOUQ News Television. Welcome back to Just Africa. Now, today we are looking at Poetic Expression, African Literature and Cultural Criticism. And our guest for today is Victoria Aldo, a Nigerian writer, cultural critic, whose work spans literature, fashion, music, and internet culture. She's particularly interested in the inherently political nature of art, and how cultural expression reflects, resists, or reshapes power. So glad to have you, Victoria Alden.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
All right, welcome to the program. Now, let's start off with the question, the first question in the heart of this conversation. Now, the first question goes like this. How can you, what does it mean actually, what does it mean to use art as an act of resistance and self-definition?
So art is inherently political, and I think that's what sometimes we forget. So different expressions of art, whether it's in writing, whether it's in visual art, whether it's in theater, they are arts of expressions of identity, but also of politics, society, and upbringing. In the anti-colonial context, we see art, as a tool for reclaiming identity. After years of colonial erasure, of course, we see this in the likes of Chinua Achebe, Benunu, Florence Wapa. But then there are also contemporary writers who speak to advanced thoughts of identity, like Ayobami Adebayo, Chukwuebuka Ibe, and even in the personal sense, there's also the power in authorship. Truly, art is a way for reclaiming identity and political expression because it gives you space to express your thoughts, what you know, and your identity. In terms of authorship, there's also power in who tells a story. As Chimamanda says, the danger of the single story. I think right now, as African art is becoming more mainstream and more globalized, African artists, writers were able to reclaim our story and show it back into the world in ways that were previously hidden under colonial pressure.
All right, so second question now, how does African art, especially poetry, yes, poetry and literature, how does it confront systems of oppression and misrepresentation?
Mm. So literature and poetry, they are both forms of expression as a mirror and as a compass. So as a mirror, it helps to reflect the society that we see and that we know. But also as a compass, it helps to give us a framework and a guide for where we should be going. So we have the likes of, Wole Soyinka, who wrote poems on systematic injustice and, other anti-colonial figures who have done the same in the past. And we see this in the works of other artists, other writers, and it's laying down the groundwork through writing to come up with a framework of resistance. It appears as fiction, it appears to be entertainment, but by the time you read these works, you see an underlining, an underlining context to it. For example, in Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's works, we see her talk about migration, feminism, and race, but then it's under the umbrella of something light, just young women living in the world. But then when you really look at it, a form of thinking of migration and of race.
Okay, so thank you very much, Victoria Audu, and many thanks for joining us on this day, Just Africa. So from your own assessment, I want to just ask a question from the economic perspective. Do you think we have leveraged this? Because I know your writing style had to use it, had to do with using art as a way of defining political power and how to create a narrative with that. But politics cannot be divulged or removed from business and economy in the global arena. Do you think Africa has taken advantage of the arts and culture in the global arena for economic purposes?
I would say that we haven't yet. I think this is one important part that we haven't yet been able to hack. So right now we have the ideology down, we have the talent down, but what's missing is that business aspect. And I think that's what a lot of creatives often miss. You get so caught up in the creative aspect, you're trying to express yourself, but you forget that, the business aspect is also a very important aspect in working with global economics and politics. I think this is one aspect that we're still behind on.
So what do you think we can do? What do you think we can do to balance, to make sure that we are really taking advantage of that?
I think first and foremost, we have to actually think about it critically. So I think that's another thing that we're missing. We're not planning enough for this. I think right now, what I would say is the music scene seems to be the only one that has kind of a global presence. when you think about Africa, think of Afrobeats and Amapiano. But even then, have we really tapped into that? You see all these global stars performing all around the world, but you don't really see people around the world coming back to Africa to watch these stars. And I think that's where the space is. That's where we're missing. So I think to be able to address that, we have to think critically, we have to plan, and we have to think, what will it mean for not just Africa to the world, but also the world to Africa, bringing everything back home, empowering our own systems back here. And I think, first of all, that starts with building the systems.
All right, thank you very much, Victoria. Now, in your own knowledge and experience, can you tell me how African literature has helped shape the public consciousness and issues like gender, justice, and also governance? I do apologize. She seems to have problems with the network. Yes, yes. All right, we have Victoria Aldi back. Victoria Aldi, you can continue with your line of thought.
Yes, apologies for the interruption. I would say that for when it comes to literature, we really see it in the narrative sovereignty, Africans telling our own stories instead of being seen through the Western lenses. And we also see this in genre blending. Of course, when you think of Africa, you think of a certain kind of literature. But younger writers were also coming up with ways to bring in Afrofuturism, speculative fiction, bringing in Gothic tropes to what we already know in our African themes. And then this is where you see African culture really coming out, because people are able to come up with contemporary ways of telling stories of, our myths, Shango, Amadioha, and the rest.
All right, thank you. Now, you mentioned younger writers. So my question goes in this line. For younger writers or the younger you, how would you advise younger writers or probably the younger you just starting up?
I would say when you want to start something, the best way to do it is just to start. I think, I did mention, planning earlier, and I think that's very important. But I think when it comes to art, coming back to that bit of it, you really just have to start, because if you keep thinking, oh, well, I want to do this, but I'm not sure how, you'll never, ever really start. So right now, there are different ways of telling stories because of the digital age. You have these platforms that make it easy to just write your stories and put them out there. People are doing video essays on YouTube. So whatever channel it is, find one and just start telling your stories.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. So it looks like in the days of Professor Wale Soyinka, in the days of Ngugi wa Thiong'o, and other, will I call them, not contemporary, they are writers, but not the writers of this age. Their work seems to, is still on the shelf till today and quite relevant. But there is, when you come to the economic aspect of it, it looks like when we transition from the analog to the digital system or from paper to computer, it looks like most of their works have not been digitalized, or even if it has been done, it looks like we have very, very few of them. And that in itself has its own toll in the economy. And most of these works are not really appreciated at home over here. They are even more appreciated abroad. So when those sales, when those copies are made, it doesn't look like the money is coming back to their domain or into Africa where it originated from. What's your perspective in this?
My perspective for this still ties back to the systems. We have all these classics because they are classics, but when the world thinks about classics, they first think about Shakespeare and his peers. But then also on a global scale, the world acknowledges Wale Soyinka and Chinua Achebe as experts in literature, and particularly in African literature. It then just falls on us to tap into that and then make it more democratized. We need to come up with systems that work in terms of preserving our history, our culture, and sharing it back to the world, not having the world come here and then take it and then write stories to share back to us.
Okay. In recent expressions, with regards to contemporary and new writers emerging from the African continent, do you think they are really telling the African story the way it should be told. Unlike the way our stories have been told by foreigners, on which the argument has been that, look, the way foreigners told our story, that's not the way we expect our stories to be told, because there are some misconceptions and falsehood that the critics said was inserted into those works. But do you see any possibility of Africans telling their story, Nigerians, Ghanaians, South Africans telling their African story in a way that is appealing and receptive in the global arena?
Definitely. I would say right now there are a lot of writers doing just that all around the globe, all around Africa, and even in the diaspora. There are many contemporary writers like Chukwuebuka Ibe, who wrote a brilliant novel, about life in a boarding school here in Nigeria. And, Pemi Aguda, who has written a contemporary novel that blends Gothic, Western thoughts with African living. I believe that these stories are very important because they don't just show one side to Africa. Africa is a continent, it's not a country. There are many different sides to it. And the more that young people write about their specific experiences, we then see the beauty and the diversity in Africa.
All right, so it's cultural criticism. Is it helping decolonize the way we think, or has it become elitist?
This is an interesting question. I would say that it can be both at the same time. So when it comes to cultural,
Victoria, I guess the network is.
The network again.
We do apologize for the network. I really like to hear response, because we need to also know how cultural criticism is helping decolonize. Earlier on the question you asked, people telling our stories for us versus we telling our stories.
Yes.
It's two different things. There's a wide margin, and we need to start. All right, we have Victoria Aldi back. Victoria Aldi, you can continue with your line of thought.
all right, thank you, and apologies again for the interruption. I would say that right now, when it comes to cultural critique, is very important for us to, see both sides of the coin. Right now, when you are critiquing the arts and culture and society building, it's very important to have it democratized in a way that everyone can say their piece. And I think in this digital world, there's space for that. With social media platforms, but there's also space for negative thoughts. Because of social media online. And I believe this then comes the point where we say the difference between critique, and slander. And I believe that by the time we even dissect this topic, as a topic for critique as well, that's when we'll be able to find the middle ground there.
What role will poetry play in questioning tradition and reimagining the future?
Poetry, as an art form itself, I think is one of the most beautiful art forms because it's something that is so layered. I believe that when people think of African poetry, they should be thinking of, the likes of poetry that speak directly to our culture and our experiences as Africans. I believe that when people write, in a political lens, with their own languages, that's always an important thing, writing in your own languages. That is when we'll be able to really see culture and then start on the process of decolonization.
Okay, now back to cultural criticism. Uh, you wrote about, I think you've written or spoken about internet culture. So, so when we talk about internet culture, do you think it harms the African continent? Does it demarcate the African continent? Or does it project African continent in a positive light to attract the foreign direct investment that our governments need in order to buoy development and provide jobs for our people in the countries in Africa? Or is it harmful or is it helpful, basically?
I would say that this is a very polarizing conversation because there are two sides to the coin. I think when we think of that white savior idea, in what we see online, they like to show the poor sides of Africa that that need a lot of help, the sides that don't really show our culture and our possibilities and our capabilities and what people are doing. And I think that obviously that is demoralizing in itself. But I think there also comes that realization that those parts do exist. And I think before we can start critiquing them for talking about that, maybe we should first address it to make it so that that becomes less of our story, and then we can then uplift the better side so that um it's a better society for everyone, where everyone is uplifted, and then there is no, like, hidden murky water that anyone is trying to show to kind of slander Africa.
Okay, great. But let's take the conversation a little deeper within the confines of cultural criticism that we're talking about. Now, do remember that most African countries, we have leaders who the financial or the security agencies have alleged that some of them, they stole monies from their respective countries when they were leaders, maybe like presidents or paramount rulers, and they take this money, they travel to Europe or to the West, they invest the money over there, stolen funds that is meant for the development and welfare of their people. They use it to develop the economy of other countries. They can be military dictators or otherwise. But we never see Western leaders steal their money, even if there's corruption among them there, steal the monies from their country, bring it down to Africa for investment. What do you think could be responsible for this movement of funds? Because up till today, we're still receiving money from the World Bank coming from the Abacha loots. How do you think we can address issues like this using the fiction, the writing, and what we're exactly talking about?
For the reasons behind this, there are obviously many reasons behind this. I think at the forefront of it, though, is something I like to preach about. It is patriotism. So when you think of the Western world, they are very patriotic. They think about themselves highly. They think about their countries highly. They think about their states very highly. So naturally, even if there is corruption there, it wouldn't be something that is popularized or widened to the sense of global critique. It's not something that they would then take funds from their own country to better another country. I think that is something that we really lack here in Africa and in Nigeria. It's not just and I'm not just talking about patriotism from the people, but also from the government, from our leaders. Everybody needs to be a bit more patriotic, in a sense where where your home is your priority. And linking that back to the conversation of cultural criticism, I would say that we have been doing this. African writers have been writing about this for a very long time. Things Fall Apart is one of the most important, fictional books, in my opinion, in the entire world, even with among global standards. And it's something that scores of people around the world have, continued to look back on and think about. This is colonial discourse. Even I remember watching an interview of Chinua Achebe once, where he said that he received a letter from an all-girls school in Seoul, in Korea, where they told him that, they read this book and they could relate so much to this book. And that's all the way from Seoul. That's all the way from Asia. And I think the time we put more importance on these books that we already have the resources. By the time we put more, importance on them, we'll be able to then use them properly to make what we want to work out.
All right, thank you very much. Now, looking at South Africa, Ghana, military rule in Nigeria, how can literature heal wounds caused by historical trauma or political violence?
I would say that when it comes to healing wounds, that is the part of literature, the part of art and expression that, is very important for identity. For example, Chimamanda wrote Half of a Yellow Sun, and it's such an important piece of literature for Nigeria, for people struggling to with the effects of the Biafran War till today. Looking on a more holistic scale in Africa, we have Hotel Rwanda that talks about the Rwanda genocide. Art has, over time, continued to lend this hand to speak to these evils and then to help people process their feelings about war and genocide and to move forward from them. So I think we've already been doing the work, but then it then comes to us to put more importance on this work to help ourselves heal as a continent.
All right, thank you very much. Now, so another question. How are African writers, how are they resisting Western imposed narratives and reclaiming historical truths?
I would say this also boils down to the power of authorship. There was once a time where you would have an African book, say a supposedly African book about a black girl, for example, written by a white man. And then it then begs the question, like, what exactly do you know about the story that you are telling? And I think this is then comes the importance of writing our own stories. African writers are doing very important work writing the stories about their experiences that other people can relate to, and then pushing that to the global audience. And I guess this comes back to this conversation about business, about how to propel our stories even further. Because if you're writing something and nobody's reading it, then it's not really doing the work that it needs to do just yet. So I think writing the stories, but also thinking of ways to better propel them into that global audience.
There's been this conversation that we need to bring back history to our curriculum in primary school, in secondary school, and we need to be more aggressive in teaching that in university, because there's this talk, or probably there's this comedy, that when you see some of our, when during my time in primary school, you asked me who was the founder of River Niger, and I was given the name of a specific white man to name. And there's this argument recently that how did he found the river in Niger, in River Niger here, when we have Nigerians who live in that part of town, who parents and forebears must have been fishing in that river since time immemorial, until the colonizers or the colonial lords came. So how can we use history and literature to correct some of these anomalies of our stories that have been mistold, to the extent that it has been carried out from generation to generation and we all believed something that it's a lie? How can we rectify that falsehood?
The simple answer is to write. When it comes to history, if you don't know where you're coming from, how can you know where you're going? You will just be walking around in circles, you'll be lost. To take history out of the curriculum is to say that, well, Nigeria doesn't have a history worth talking about. And we all know that's not true at all. Our history is so rich, but then where do we even start from? People at university level don't know anything about where they come from, don't know anything about Nigeria as a country and the histories and the people that built it. When it comes to thinking about it is so important to write these things down. I believe there is a place for oral tradition, and I believe it's very important. But I think the most important aspect we need to talk about is actually writing these things down. I believe that a government sponsored initiative where we have historians come together to just sit down and document every one of these oral traditions that we know will take us so far. If those assets are published and kept in school libraries in Nigeria, in Africa, and even around the world, we would go so far in reclaiming our history and our stories.
Okay.
All right, before we round off, today is actually a day set aside by the United Nations General Assembly in 2009 to honor the life and legacy of Nelson Mandela, anti-apartheid icon. So, in your own little knowledge about him, I would like you to share some things that throughout his life that has inspired you and the way forward.
When I think about Nelson Mandela, I actually think of a master storyteller. And I know, of course, he's an activist, he's a political leader, he's so many things. But then he's someone who took storytelling to the next step. He did not just, think about things and write about them, but he also did things. He did so many important things through his speeches, his writing, and even his silence. He shaped this narrative of resistance, of dignity, of reconciliation. Even with his autobiography, his memoir, he talked about the national struggles of, South Africa and of hope. And, not just him, but the people around him as well, Desmond Tutu, Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, Patrice Lumumba of Congo. These are people that kind of live the same legacy of being political leaders, but even more than that, being storytellers, people that know where they've come from, know their history, and now on a mission, or rather, we're on a mission to take that history and kind of propel it to the entire world. And they've done their part, and I think it's just from us to just pick that mantle up. So yeah, when I think about Nelson Mandela, I think about a political leader, yes, but also a master storyteller who cared very much about his people.
Thank you so much, Victoria Audu. Now, Nelson Mandela said, I want to paraphrase with one of the powerful statements he made, that Africa will assume its rightful position in the globe and take its rightful position either in economics, business, development, or politics if Nigeria gets it right. So, how can you assess that statement with regards to Nigeria's place? Living up to its responsibility, as the word says, we are the giant of Africa.
I believe that to live up to that statement, a lot of work needs to be done, and we're just not there yet. We are, yes, the giant of Africa, but it's not just a title that we should, cling on to from the past. This is something that we should strive for every day as we work together as a nation. And, this boils down to the educational system, the infrastructure, the things that we know from home and how we translate them to abroad, to the entire global world. So I think it's not just something that we should just sit down and think, yes, we're the giant of Africa, but it's something that we should actively strive for every day to assume that position as a nation that can be called and respected as the giant of Africa.
All right, thank you very much, Victoria Audu. It has been a pleasure, sharing literature and poetry with you. We do hope that, of course, we'll have you some other time to shed more light on other topics.
All right, thank you very much for having me.
Yes, before we go, like I said earlier on, today is International Day for Nelson Mandela.
Yes, the United Nations, give that specific day to him, and the expectation was that is to honor this man who has shown a side that is worth emulating. He's been seen as an institution to be studied when it comes to about one who has love for his people, who will go to any length, Lord Godfather, to go to any length to protect his people, to keep his people, and also to go to any length to protect and keep his people. Now, the United Nations said about 67 years for which that specific state went through struggling, and that anyone who comes across celebrate the day with an acknowledging day of the International Day of Nelson Mandela should make sure that they show some form of kindness for 67 minutes.
Yes.
Is expected of every morning. So I hope they're also preaching that story in Europe. Yes, in America, in London, in other countries that are not just in the continent of Africa. I hope it's being seen, not only seen like that, but have it in their history books that is a man worth emulating and is someone in the class of the John Carter, the former United States presidents, the Margaret Thatchers, and other leaders from the western part of the country.
All right, thank you very much. This is where we will be rounding off today's edition of Just Africa. Just like we said, today, July 18th, is a day set aside by the United Nations General Assembly. It was established in 2009, set aside to honor the life and times of an anti-apartheid icon, Nelson Mandela. So as we are signing out, we'll leave you with a special report, a special story on the life and times of Nelson Mandela. From here on, pray.
Yes, many thanks for watching. I'm Oyin Priye Krumale, and do have yourself a splendid weekend.
And I am Olumide Shokoya. Don't forget to also watch and share, like, comment on all our social media platforms at SOUQ News TV. Enjoy the rest of your day.
We've got just what you need right here at Femi Wash Media. Call it the Midas Touch, and you wouldn't be wrong. Let us record, produce, mix, and master your audio like nobody does. Reach us on our contact today for the best quality job.
Being a critical instrument of national unity, cohesion, and integration. We look forward to better days ahead.
He was a man of few words, but of firm convictions. A soldier turned statesman whose presence in Nigeria's political and historical narrative spanned over 5 decades. From the rugged terrain of Daura to the grandeur of Aso Rock, Muhammadu Buhari's life was marked by discipline, duty, and a dogged commitment to national service. Born on December 17, 1942 in Daura, Katsina State, Muhammadu Buhari came of age in a young Nigeria still finding its identity. He joined the Nigerian army at the age of 19, embarking on a military career that would shape his worldview and leadership style. From the Nigerian Military Training College in Kaduna to advanced training in India, the UK, and the US, Buhari rose through the ranks with discipline and precision. He played active roles in the Nigerian Civil War and later held key command positions. In 1983, at the age of 41, he emerged as Nigeria's military head of state after a coup that cited corruption and national decay as justifications. His 20-month military regime, 1983 to 1985, was defined by a crusade for order, the War Against Indiscipline, WAI. It was controversial yet unforgettable. Queues, punctuality, and national ethos became central themes of national life. His administration clamped down on corrupt officials and introduced austerity measures amid a challenging economic backdrop. But as rigid as the regime appeared, it laid bare Buhari's ideology, a no-nonsense leader who believed national development could not thrive on indiscipline or excess. After his ousting in 1985, Buhari went quiet, but not forgotten. In 2003, he returned, not with tanks, but with ballots. He contested Nigeria's presidency 3 times and lost, but with each attempt, his popularity grew, particularly in the north. In 2015, at the age of 72, he made history. Muhammadu Buhari became the first opposition candidate to defeat an incumbent president in Nigeria's democratic history, a moment of national rebirth. Hope transition. President Buhari's administration spanned 2 terms, 8 years of trials and triumphs. His government focused on 3 pillars: security, anti-corruption, and economic revival. He expanded Nigeria's railway network, the Abuja-Kaduna, Lagos-Ibadan, and Warri-Itakpe lines. Major infrastructure projects, including the long-awaited Second Niger Bridge, became realities. They launched social investment programs like NPAR and Trader Money, designed to empower the poor and unemployed. On anti-corruption, he revived dormant cases, strengthened the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, EFCC, and repatriated looted funds from abroad. On agriculture, the Anchor Borers program revived rice and local grain production. But security remained a daunting challenge. Boko Haram, banditry, and farmer header crisis. His government wrestled with an evolving threat landscape, navigating global and regional dynamics. Whether admired or criticized, Muhammadu Buhari remained consistent. In his 2015 inaugural speech, he declared, "I belong to everybody and I belong to nobody," a phrase that would define the tone of his presidency.
I intend to keep my oath and serve as president to all Nigerians. I belong to everybody and I belong to nobody.
He was not a perfect leader. No leader ever is, but he was purposeful. A patriot, a man of few indulgences, who even in retirement preferred a quiet life in his home in Daura. In the history of Nigeria's journey, Buhari's chapter is long and layered. He is remembered as a bridge between Nigeria's military past and democratic future, a man who served with both command and conviction. His critics acknowledged his sincerity. His supporters saw him a symbol of incorruptibility. As Nigeria moves forward, the memory of Muhammadu Buhari endures, not just in marble, policy, or power, but in history, in governance, in the fabric of a nation that continues to evolve. Soldier, statesman, servant, Muhammadu Buhari's watch has ended, but his imprint remains. Grace Komolafe, SOUQ News TV.
Idumota Market. Eko Idumota, once a residential neighborhood, is home to Idumota Market located on Lagos Island. It is one of the oldest and arguably one of the largest markets in West Africa. Idumota is a historic neighborhood adjacent to the Lagos port that facilitated the slave trade, and later under the British indirect rule, it surrounded to exports that fueled the colonial enterprise. Idumota was also the location of an armed forces remembrance cenotaph called Soja Idumota, built as a monument to Nigerian soldiers who served with the West African Frontier Force. An Eyo Masquerade statue and a clock tower are also some monuments at Idumota. Idumota Market is so popular that large sales are recorded as early as 7 a.m. The market is made up of hundreds of locked-up shops occupying several multi-story buildings, with some measuring about 5 or more floors. In 2010, the Lagos State government demolished some illegal structures in order to improve vehicular and human movement in and around the markets. During weekdays, the neighborhood of Idumota is densely populated by shoppers, traders, and bus passengers. From the Carter Bridge ascending into Lagos Island, passengers can see the neighborhood before disembarking at their final destination. Idumota Market accommodates the substantial inflow of imported goods. The bulk of import from abroad are routed first through Idumota and then on to other markets through Nigeria and other West and Central African countries. The energy of private Idumota traders and wholesalers facilitate this activity, where millions of US dollars worth of wholesale is exchanged daily. Idumota Markets, SOUQ Enlightenment. The Three Wise Men. Iconic sculptures and statues adorn major metropolitan cities of the world. In Lagos, Nigeria, the statue of three men designed to depict the state's cultural heritage and to usher in visitors and tourists into the ever-accommodating center of excellence is no doubt an astounding work of art. Originally built under the administration of Colonel Raji Rasaki, designed by Bodu Shodende in 1991 and standing over 12 feet high, referred to as Agba Meta or Aro Meta, the three sculptured chiefs were placed along the Lagos-Ibadan toll gate to welcome people coming into Lagos State.